Hi, welcome to Fit Kids Conversations. I'm here with Marti Reed, Director of National Partnerships and DEI Programming Manager for Positive Coaching Alliance. Welcome, Marti.
Thanks for having me, David. Excited to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how that impacts the world of youth sports and fitness as we talk about on Fit Kids Conversations, all things kids fitness, health, social emotional learning, and how to get along in life with fitness as a driver and a backdrop to all we do. So, Marti, can you start off by telling us a little bit about your role at Positive Coaching Alliance and especially the DEI portion of that and what that means in terms of your day-to-day work?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, for those that are unfamiliar with Positive Coaching Alliance or PCA, we're a national nonprofit, and we're on a mission to really create positive youth sports experience, regardless of socioeconomic status or where you come from, where you live. We really want all kids to have access to a positive youth sports experience that helps them become the best version of themselves. And I serve as our national or director of our national partnerships, as well as DEI programming manager. And when it comes to the DEI work specifically, I was one of the leads in launching our Sports Can Battle Racism content and initiative. And that's including a workshop that we launched for coaches in 2020, as well as one for athletes in 2021. After the murder of George Floyd and the social unrest, we really found it in our responsibility to not only stand up against violence and hatred, but also provide resources and actual tangible tools that can help coaches form environments that are free of discrimination, that bring kids together, where we can use sports to not only learn, grow, and have fun, but also connect with with each other and really battle against discrimination and racism. So our initiative started with that curriculum development for coaches and for athletes. And then we also would host roundtable conversations where we brought other thought leaders to the table who are experts in this space. I think a big part of DEI is learning and growing and active listening to perspectives that are outside of our own. So we really knew there's a lot of people out here already doing this work and very familiar with it. So we wanted to take a step back and put them on our platform and say, share with us what you've learned, how we can grow. So we did a lot of active listening. And then what are some tools that we can develop that coaches can implement right away in their practices, in games throughout the season that really help create this environment. So I can dive deeper in that as we continue to chat more, but that's kind of the synopsis of what we've been doing. And it's worked really well. I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing.
So what you've said is really interesting. One of the things that I always liked about sports when I was growing up and where I was growing up was how some of the DEI components, what we now consider DEI, were baked into this, even back in the 70s and 80s when I was a kid, where if I met up on a playground in a pickup game with somebody from a different background, the sport actually helped us meld. So it seems like some of what you're talking about would occur naturally, but obviously as diverse as our country has become and as inflamed as the politics and rhetoric have become, and the turning point we experienced with George Floyd's murder seem to have upped the ante in that. So can you talk a little bit about that arc from exercise, sports, fitness, togetherness, already natural bridges built in, to what you needed to do explicitly to capitalize on those bridges?
Right. I do believe that sports quite naturally is a great place to bring us all together, to create connection, help us overcome bias, because it offers that opportunity to build relationships oftentimes with people that aren't like you or grow up differently than you. So quite naturally, it can be a great place to unite. But if you think of that Nelson Mandela quote where it says sports has the power to unite. It's not an automatic, right? It just doesn't happen because we play sports together or we're connected together. We have to also be able to make sure that in those spaces where we're mixing diversities and different peoples and ways of life, that you're valuing that diversity, that you're listening and learning from each other and not just tolerating differences, but actually celebrating differences. So I think that's the difference when we became more deliberate about, making sure that we're recognizing these differences and celebrating them as well. Like offering uniqueness when you come into different teams and environments and sports, like you get to learn about other people's family and cultures and how they do things. So actually being intentional about that rather than just kind of thinking it's going to happen just by chance.
Great. So what are some of the tools that you offer through Positive Coaching Alliance and your work there that makes that more explicit and connective and intentional?
Yeah, we have different activities and games that coaches can do with players and athletes to make sure that they are learning more about each other. There's this one game that we play that's at the start of practice or as you're gathering together. It's called Bet You Didn't Know. And every kid has to go around and say something about themselves or their family that they want to share that folks probably wouldn't know about them. So it's really providing that space and that outlet for kids to get to know each other better. And then we also have movie discussion guides where we actually share different movies that can highlight a different culture or educate on these topics, because it's really hard to have a conversation about racism or bias or these big topics with youth. So we find ways to really create this environment where they're comfortable learning about this through movies and through video and things like that, through games and activities. There's a lot of times we do get pushback from people from the outside looking in saying, wow, you're already talking about a concept like racism with kids. Like, aren't they too young for this conversation? Well, if my 6-year-old little cousin is young enough to experience racism, then we do have to start having these conversations at a younger age and really recognizing that it's not enough to say, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. No, we have to see each other's color, and let's recognize that and celebrate it. So bringing different types of games like that and opening those conversations where you're allowing kids to share and be their unique self and not feeling like they have to kind of assimilate or hide parts of themselves to fit in. We want to recognize that uniqueness and celebrate it.
Great. And then what other forms of culture? You mentioned video, maybe music, et cetera. Other examples of that?
Yes, I think music is a big one. And then games specifically. So there's this game that we play called the alphabet game, where every kid gets a letter, or we use actually the first letter of their names, and they have to get in groups and think of how many words they could come up with only using the first letter of their names. And we intentionally make one group not have any vowels, so it's harder for them to create any words. And then we have a discussion after and say, oh, how'd you do? And the group that got so many words are like, yeah, we did great. We got 15 words, this, and that. And the group that didn't get any words are like, well, we didn't have any vowels. We couldn't make a word at all. And then we have a larger conversation about that, about, what it means to have privilege, to have access to a vowel. And, how that game is kind of similar to some systems in our society where it's set up for some groups to perform better than others at no fault of their own. We didn't choose our name, right? Our name was given to us. So we have the conversation of things like oppression and privilege and thinking like, oh, well, people can just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and it's fine, but not everyone's starting at the same starting place. There's been years and years and centuries of oppression, specifically on Black and Brown folks. And it's important for us to have that awareness and understand it so we can do better in the future. So we do talk about our shared history and why that matters and why it's important to understand so we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past.
Can you talk about some breakthroughs that you've experienced in terms of getting through to certain coaches who maybe just never quite thought of it this way?
Yeah. And honestly, within our workshops, we do look for and ask for our participants to be prepared to kind kind of break down those walls and get vulnerable with us. So in order to do that, as trainers, we have to start off and be vulnerable ourselves. So we usually share our why, like why this message is important, why it matters to us, a bit about our personal story for the participants. And once we kind of break those walls down and they're able to listen more, to understand rather than to respond right away. We've heard so much great feedback from coaches by the end of the workshop of like, wow, I thought that I really had this under control. I thought that I understood, how to connect with my athletes. I thought it was just, it doesn't matter where they come from. I treat every athlete the exact same. But now I realize I have to take the time to get to know my athletes individually. And it is not a one size fits all. And I do need to recognize some of the things that are going on in this country can affect these athletes differently, right? And we have to be prepared to have those conversations with them when they come and they ask questions and they want to look to you as a caring adult and a support for them. So we want to help equip coaches for that. And we have been getting a lot of feedback from coaches that the workshop has been so eye-opening and helped them in enlightenment, to be honest.
Do you go down to the level of discussing microaggressions and helping coaches recognize what their microaggressions may be?
Absolutely. And we do share video a lot in our workshop. So it might not be me saying exactly what microaggressions are. We have a video of Steph Curry talking about a microaggression and, an example of what he's experienced when he's in an interview and he's talking and they say, wow, you speak so well, as if that he's not supposed to have eloquent speech and things like that. So we share video of what a microaggression means, what it sounds like, and how it affects athletes, how it puts them in a box and doesn't allow them to really be their self because they're put in a box. And then we also share a study that was done by the NCAA in basketball on sports announcing and how they would speak about the Black players versus the white players, and how they would use words that really described intellect and specialness and things like that when they talked about the white players. But then when they talked about the Black players, all the words that they used were directly to their athletic ability and athleticism, right? So that's an example of microaggressions and how you're putting things in a certain box and not really allowing people to, really become who they are because you're telling them who they are before they have that opportunity.
Curious if you can talk a little bit about your own background, your own experience through your athletic arc and even into your professional career, and how you have had to overcome racism, and any specific stories that you might want to share that would illustrate this.
Yes, thank you for that question. So obviously being a Black woman and playing sports, playing softball specifically, I was often the only Black girl on the team. I was also often the only Black person in my classes. I was in the gifted classes as a child. So I was used to being in predominantly white spaces when it came to sports and education. And I would often hear people say things like, oh, Marti's not Black, she's different, as if that was a compliment, but when I achieve things, they would say, it's because you're different, right? But one time specifically, we were going to have my white teammates over my house for a team dinner. I was, I think, a freshman in high school at the time. And before that evening came, one of my white teammates walked up to me and she said, Marti, is it true that when we get to your house, we have to duck when we get out the car? And she literally was tying my Blackness to violence and poverty and things like that, So I think about those moments and those times and those types of stories that I recall from my youth and my younger years, not really knowing and recognizing the microaggressions and the overt racism then, like not really knowing how to handle it. And looking back on those moments, I do have grace because I understand they weren't trying to deliberately offend me. There's so many biases that we have and it's unchecked. They learn that from a parent or someone else in their life that And if I'm maybe the only Black person that they're being exposed to, this is their thought process, So it was really eye-opening. But looking back on those moments, I don't want other young kids that are maybe the only one in their group to have to experience things like that. Right. So I think it's important for us to have conversations, not just when racism is like blatant and overt, but also when it's subtle and when it's systematic and things like that. So that's why I'm really passionate about what we're doing at Positive Coaching Alliance. So that's just an example of a microaggression that I received when I was a youth.
Sure. I'm sorry that happened to you. Let's talk a little bit about in the heat of the moment, what coaches can do. And again, try to cast this a little bit in terms of the Fit Kids environment of, in fitness rather than in team sports. What are some of the checks and balances that a coach should put into his or her mindset from the get-go?
So I think if you ever hear something or see something that can be harmful or hurtful in terms of any isms, right? We talk about a concept of calling in versus calling out. So immediately we often look to, the easiest thing is to do nothing and say nothing, right? I think that's the easiest thing to do, but then that leaves racism and things unchecked. So we have to be able to be upstanders in those moments and do something about it. So if we're going to choose to do something about it, you can call in or call out. Calling out would be shutting it down immediately, saying that's not okay. What are you thinking? Shutting someone down immediately with not leaving any space to have a conversation or rectify the damage. While on the other end, calling in would be taking the time to tell someone that that's not okay and why that's not okay or why that was harmful. So spending some time to call in and see, what were your intentions behind that? What did you mean by that? So taking a bit more time. Calling in is much harder to do because it does take patience. It takes time. You might want to have a pre-existing relationship with the person before calling in. So we talk about when the best time to use calling in versus calling out. I do think our culture is a call out culture right now. We probably call out 90% of the time and call in 10% of the time, when it should be reversed if we're really thinking of long-term impact, right? And long-term change and investment. It is going to take some time. We have to meet people where they are, but I still think the call out method is useful and important. And if someone is just blatantly being disrespectful, by all means, call them out.
To tease that apart a little bit further, the scenario is child A says something inappropriate and you see that child B is traumatized. Immediately attend to child B's trauma, or do you focus on remedial calling in of child A?
I think that we should immediately respond to the child who is being victimized, traumatized in that moment, to take care of them first. That's the priority. I always say, no context is above causing harm. We have to take that time to make sure the child is okay first before we address the issues and shut it down. If it's physical harm, yes, we need to shut that down right away. But emotional harm, emotional pain, let's take some time to check on the person that was just harmed in that moment. I think that's priority one. And then the second thing is, now we need to follow up and handle the child who said something inappropriate, said something hurtful. Why did you do that? What was your thought process behind that? What's going on in your life right now that makes you feel that it's okay to say something like that? Then we need to do the follow-up there.
And are there steps you recommend the coach take to repair the relationship in the scenario between child A and child B? Are there elements of restorative justice involved?
I think so. It also depends on the child also. So I wouldn't try to rush a relationship right away. The child that was harmed needs to take that time to process, and, what's best for them is most important, right? We're not trying to tell someone who's oppressed how to handle the oppressor, right? I think that's the most important thing. And then, I think there are active steps that you can take as a coach or a caring adult, asking open-ended questions, pulling them to the side, maybe not doing it in front of everyone, because we don't want to pile on, right, in this damaging way. So I mean, having a private conversation to the side, asking those open-ended questions to get more context of where this thought came from and why they felt that it was okay to share that. And then I think there has to be continued follow-up. So it's not just a one-time conversation. Okay, we check the box, we're good. We squash this, let's move on. I think we have to make sure that we're following up with the children to see, did they understand this? Are they hearing you? And then actually, are you seeing a difference? Do we need to revisit this? So having that time to recognize and also reflect back and follow up is very important to the process here.
So continuing in that scenario with those same two kids, let's say a week later or 2 weeks later, there's a buddy system opportunity. Do you pair those kids up? Do you try to bring them into circumstances where they can actually strengthen the relationship after the trauma has been inflicted?
I think it just depends on the child. Not everyone has the ability to be able to connect right away after something. So if they were able to process it and the healing has started, then that is a possibility. But if it hasn't happened, you think there needs to be more time, I wouldn't try to force it right away.
Great. And you talked before about kind of active listening. If you can provide some tips of what active listening looks like and feels like, and maybe caring adults can train themselves to do that.
Yes. I think active listening really involves perspective taking and alignment. So taking yourself out of the scenario or situation and not trying to jump in and add your own life experience to it right away. Because I think as adults, we're always trying to see how this makes sense for us if we were in their shoes, right? But we're not in their shoes in this moment, and how they're feeling is their feelings, right? So I think the first step is to try to gain perspective by just listening to understand, repeating back, say, do I have this right? It sounds like you're not getting along with people on the team. Is that correct? Asking those types of questions, repeating what they're saying, asking if you have it right. And then I think another good question is, do you want my help right now, or do you just need me to listen? Asking those types of questions, because oftentimes we just want to insert, fix it mode, right? But sometimes I just want you to listen and know that it's okay to be feeling that way and that you're there for them and that you support them. And then I think when it comes to alignment, it's getting down on their level, looking them eye to eye, make sure you're making that eye contact, nodding your head, just listening and resisting that urge to fix it right away and just jump in or alter their experience based on your own personal life experience. I think that's probably the hardest part, because we all have our ways of thinking and can easily jump into judgment mode based on our own life experience. So I think the biggest thing is listening to understand without judgment, not trying to jump in, and resisting that urge to fix it right away.
I'd also like to ask what your experience has been, and maybe any research that you've been exposed to that talks about the benefits of children being led by an adult who looks like them.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think that's huge. Representation matters. In my experience, like I said, I grew up playing softball, predominantly white sport, and it wasn't until my mom took me to a UCLA softball game when I saw the Black shortstop by the name of Natasha Watley in a UCLA uniform that planted the seed to make me want to even play at UCLA in the future, right? So if you can see it, you can become it. I think it's so important for us to see ourselves in our leaders and in our role models, and also to be coached or led by people that are from the same community as you, that can understand some of the things, the stressors that could be going on in the community and speak to those. I think that's important. And yeah, when it comes to representation, I think especially for women, we need to see more women leaders. We need to be able to connect on that level as well. We have a gender equity initiative at Positive Coaching Alliance where we are invested in really getting more women coaching, more girls participating, and being able to really provide support for them once they're there. So it's not enough just to, bring more girls into sports. We have to make sure that we're providing the support where it's a safe place, where they're seen, they're valued, they're heard while they're participating. So I think those are just some of the things I think of right away when I think about representation and why it's so important and why it matters.
Great. We've got just a couple minutes left, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to sum up or raise new points that we didn't get to that you feel are important for DEI to really take hold in sports and fitness environments.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really important. Sports is such a safe space for us if we really go about it the right way. The ability to connect with one another. When we expose kids to new and interesting experiences, that can help break bias, right? And remove bias in our lives. So the more we can, as coaches, expose kids to new and interesting experiences, have them connecting with one another, having fun, and celebrating those moments of diversity, culture, different ways of doing things, the better.
That's wonderful. It's a great vision, and I'm very happy that you and Positive Coaching Alliance are so involved in this, and you get to exert your leadership as well. Congratulations on that.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure. It's fun to work with Positive Coaching Alliance. It's fun to work with different organizations, and seeing what you're doing with Fit Kids is just really, really powerful. And yeah, we'd love to see it.